Hi, welcome to Get Used to It. I'm Sheila Kuehl, your host, and today we have another in an occasional series that we're calling Voices of Our Lives, where we talk to men and women who've been stellar in our gay and lesbian community, just to see sort of how they got where they are and what they think about everything. And I'm very pleased today to have as our guest Jewel Tice Williams, who is the owner of Jewel's Catch One Disco, and has been for 25 years here in Los Angeles. Welcome, Jewel.
Thank you, Sheila, and thanks for inviting me to your show.
Well, I should have said, in addition to being Jewel's Catch One Disco, it's Jewel's Catch One Community Services Center and just about everything else, at least in the hood, as you said to me.
Right.
Right around the corner, actually, from where I grew up. But I'd love to know kind of how you got where you are, why you made some of the decisions that you did, because we talked to a lot of activists, and a number of them have really not been, as you know, business people. It's been an area that they haven't even thought, even entrepreneurially. And yet, in the movement now, it seems as though the entrepreneurial spirit and the activist spirit are coming closer and closer and closer together as we realize that those are the people that know how to get things done. So, well, tell me just sort of about your childhood. Did you grow up here in California?
Yes, I did. I was born in Gary, Indiana, but my folks moved to San Diego during World War II. What had happened was that they basically started from Arkansas and went north to Chicago and the Gary, Indiana area. And then some of my uncles and older cousins were drafted or enlisted in the war, and when they were released, they came back to San Diego. So the call went out, hey, the promised land is not the north and the steel mills and that.
It's not Gary, Indiana.
No. There's a real promised land out here on the West Coast where, you know, opportunities abound. And so all of my mother's relatives pulled up their stakes in the Midwest and headed west.
Like a lot of people during the war and after the war. Did you have siblings?
Yes, there was 7 of us. I'm number 5 of 7. So, you know, I held a real strong, valuable position in the hierarchy of who was important in my family. But it worked out fine. There's 4 girls and 3 boys.
So when did you come north to LA?
For the first time in 1957, when I graduated from high school. Don't try to add it. I'll tell you later.
I don't need to. That's the year I graduated, too.
Okay, so we're on the same page.
Yeah,
then.
we are.
Right. And I had a big $50 scholarship to UCLA from one of the African-American sororities. And I came up here, and I had 3 or 4 brothers and sisters that lived here in LA. And we had a little house that was first rented by my oldest brother when he finished pharmacy school at UC Berkeley. And he came back and established a residence that as we graduated from high school, we migrated to LA, my brothers, sisters, and I, one by one until the last one arrived.
So did you stay in LA?
No, not the first time. I was at UCLA, first time away from home, and during a time when there was one more recession, and finding work was a little difficult. I had the ambition, and the only job that I could find in those days was to clean house, which I did on every Saturday. I cleaned the house of one of my junior high school teachers that lived here in the LA area. And then after she couldn't afford to hire me anymore, it became increasingly difficult to find a job. In those days, in the 50s, people think that these things only happened in the South, but it's not true. If you were dark-skinned, African-American, you could not work pretty much any place here in LA, or San Diego for that matter, which was part of the reason why I had left San Diego and moved here was because of the extremely conservative attitude in San Diego.
Thinking it would be better in Westwood, huh?
Right, right. Yeah, and not only that, it was not only was it the Bullocks and the May companies and those kind of retail stores that wouldn't hire you, but even African American businesses, if you weren't a certain hue, you couldn't get hired there too. So finding a job was pretty tough.
So you ended up going back?
Yeah, I did. My folks could not afford to send any of us to college, and so we kind of had to make it. With my brothers, it was pretty easy for them to find things to do. Using their resources, they could get by, you know, from doing lawns to delivering papers to all those kinds of things.
Right.
But for us women, it was a little bit difficult.
And did you at this time already have a sense that you were a lesbian?
No, I didn't. That didn't come until I was in my mid-20s. And I never really thought about it, even though there were a couple of incidences that happened, i.e. With one of my girlfriends when we were like 10 or 11 and watching the movies at the elementary school auditorium for 5 cents to get in there and watch Johnny McBrown and Long Ranger and, you know, the serials that you had to go back week after week to see. You know, we would play around with each other, touch each other, but it didn't click that there was, that I was a lesbian or that there was anything more wrong with that than if it was a boy that I was playing with.
Right.
But I was a natural tomboy. I could beat my brothers shooting marbles, playing tops, playing football, basketball, ping pong, you name it. You know, it was in there. You know, when we hear people, and I can say myself included in that group, say they were born that way. I was born that way. You know, nobody taught me. No one gave me these skills. No one said, you know, go in there and try your brother's sports jacket on and see how cute you look. I did that on my own. But it still never quite jived because in my family, sex, like a lot of families in those days, you didn't talk about it. It was never discussed. Not even heterosexual sex was discussed. So, you know, needless to say, there was not going to be any conversation about homosexual
But
sex.
you had an impression, didn't you, that it was a bad thing? I mean, we sure
Oh,
did.
most
I don't know where it
definitely.
came from exactly.
Well, it came from the people around us. You know, kids are pretty open, pretty clear little people that generally don't have a lot of prejudices, or I don't believe have any, except what they get from the adults around them. So it was that, you know, and my idea of what a lesbian and what a sissy, quote unquote, was, I did not begin to understand the wide variety and wide range of different kinds of behavior that lesbians and gays represent.
So where were you in your 20s when all this changed?
I was here in LA. I had started to work. I got a job at Safeway Market, supermarket, and there was another lady that was hired, and she invited me to dinner one day, and I said, yeah, fine. I'll come to your place if you come to mine first. So the first invitation went out, and we set a date, and she came over, and I cooked dinner for her. And it was like friends hanging out from work, and she felt really comfortable to me, just, you know, being a friend. Because all my other brothers and sisters had married by then, all of the older ones anyway. And so I welcomed a friend, a close friend that I worked with. So she invited me to her place a couple of nights later. And during the course of the evening and drinking, which I didn't normally do, I could feel that this was not just an ordinary girlfriend come by and have a little snack with me kind of evening. So after dinner, the fireplace was lit, and I thought this was just really kind of fabulous to have been invited and have this kind of evening going on. And pretty soon she leaned over and asked me, you know, really up close, and I backed up a little. She said, have you ever been with a woman? And I said, been how? You know? She says, and you are, aren't you? I said, I am what? Am I? And she said, oh no, I don't believe it. You know, I just assumed that you were. Were what? That you're a lesbian. So, oh no, 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 no. She said, you mean you've never kissed a woman? I don't think so. No, not me. So she said, well, why don't we just kiss? I said, no, no, no. She asked the same thing as you. Well, what's the deal with it? You know, where did this attitude of not knowing, number one, who you are, and you know, not wanting to experiment even with that. And I told her, you know, what I knew was that lesbians had the short haircuts, and at the time I was wearing my hair longer, had short haircuts, and they wore Levi's and always white, very starched iron shirts with the with the cuffs turned up on the sleeves and a pack of cigarettes stuck in that. Well, I didn't smoke, and I didn't own a white shirt.
Right, exactly.
And my hair was long. And she said, well, did you ever think of what their counterparts might be like? You know, because she was very effeminate and quite the lady. And I said, well, no, I thought that they were the ones that were. She said, no. Generally speaking, these types over here that you just described are usually with people like me. Like you? You mean, yes. So then we put it on fast forward. She invited me to bed, and I didn't answer, but I gradually made my way to the bed.
You didn't leave either,
no.
right?
No. Huh. And so I undressed fireman style. I mean, I kept on all my undergarments. I put my shoes so that I could do, you know, if I had to leave, I had this all planned so one motion would have me fully dressed and out the door. You know, in case I changed my mind, or I don't know what I was.
There was more danger there than you could imagine, right?
Right.
And of course there was.
Yeah, it was
yeah.
at the beginning of the danger. But I made it through that, and we ended up being together for a little over 11 years.
Wow. Oh, and did you move in together?
Yeah, we did. Shortly after, you know how women move. You know, we don't waste time. See, I know your phone number and your name, and
so you want to move in
you
together?
like me, right? Yeah. Well, the first is coming up 2 weeks from now, so why don't we start looking for an apartment? So that's kind of the way that went.
Let's not waste any rent.
No.
Right.
So we moved in.
And did it scare you?
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
to think that's what you might be. I mean, the word that she couldn't even say,
right.
really.
Right, it did, and for years, you know, I kept up the facade of not being a lesbian, and started, you know, wearing makeup and stuff that I never did before. She was bisexual, I found out later, and had her own rules about, you know, how our life should be, and me being a neophyte didn't know, so I got all the input from her about what we were to be like.
What was life like then? I mean, it must have been sort of a double life in a way, because you're at work, right? The market, and then sort of, was there a community or a group or places to go, or you know, what was life like?
Well, it was very lonely then because it was the two of us, and she was recently, had recently moved here from the Midwest, and I hadn't been out, so consequently we didn't have any gay or lesbian friends that we could turn to play with or to cry on their shoulder or lament about.
Or to tell
Whatever.
that you're in love.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So.
But were there social places that you could go or went?
We did find out after 2 or 3 years of being together. We found out about a couple of clubs, and I worked in another supermarket that was, in fact, right across the street from Catch, and that was like the neighborhood, I found out later, where most African American lesbian and gays lived. So we started there, and eventually we found out about a couple of clubs, and we eventually bought a house together in Inglewood, in a very conservative neighborhood. So when it came time to go out to these clubs, I had the old Superwoman technique, I guess, together. I would change clothes in my car. That was my booth. And I came out.
So you didn't want to walk from your door to the car?
Oh, no. What if someone
in your dyke clothes, right?
Yeah, in my dyke clothes,
Oh.
you know, in the motel socks. That's what we used to call those thin black ones that you could see your ankle bones and stuff through. And so I would bag those up in my brown bag, and then wait till I got out in the car and away from my immediate neighborhood, because what if somebody found out? You know,
Right,
that
right.
really wouldn't be kosher. So,
And were the clubs a good place to go?
yeah, they were as they've served the community, and I know mine has served the community in a little bit different way, in that I've been there for a long time, and the climate as far as gays and lesbians coming out have changed over the years. But it was a place where you could meet people and eventually get invited to their parties and have people over for dinner and barbecues and different things like that.
You couldn't advertise the place, really, could you?
No. It was, and generally they were way out or in areas that were considered a little bit seedy. You know, the main club that we went to was topless bar most of the nights, but then we were there 1 or 2 nights a week.
So what made you decide to get your own place, to open your own club?
Well, I was pushed by economics, and prior to getting the club, I owned a boutique, which was my first venture at being self-employed.
A clothing boutique?
Yeah, ladies' clothing. And I knew from the time that I was a little kid, though, that I wanted to have my own business or be my own boss, and I found it difficult working for people, even though while I was there, I did the best job that I could do, and I never gave anybody any hassle. But in my heart, I knew that you know, it was not what I wanted for myself, and that I wanted to be self-employed. So the opportunity came, and I opened up a boutique. Recession, another one came in the early 70s. And that meant the first thing that women, which was the population that I served, the first thing that they give up when money crunches set in is the things that they do for themselves, including buying clothes, getting their hair done, nails done, whatever it is that they can stop doing to save money. Usually it's about denying themselves, you know, some of the things that they would like to have.
So there'd be money for the family and money for the children.
Exactly, sure.
And that would be it during a recession,
Yeah,
right?
pretty much.
So your business was pretty hard hit.
Yeah, it was. But I ended up still hanging on to it for a couple of years, and in the interim, opening the club. And that's a little story all by itself, too. as I mentioned before, I worked across the street at a supermarket 4 years prior to my finding the catch and coming back there. And at that time, like I said, this was the 50s when we didn't have equal opportunity and discrimination laws, and so people did pretty much what they wanted to, and most of them elected not to have any integration in their businesses, homes, and schools even, by virtue of
where we lived.
Yeah, you got it. So when I decided that I would get into the bar business, it was either that or a liquor store, and one of my brothers owned a liquor store, and I knew he worked very hard and long hours, and I said, well, there's got to be a better way, and plus it seemed like it would be a lot more fun. And then we had Gunsmoke with Miss Kitty on. That was the top ranked.
Showing you just how to run a bar.
Right. And the girl could do it. She knew how to hold down a bar and keep all the cowboys in order. And I said, boy, that seems like that could be something that I would really, really like to do.
Now, wouldn't she like to know she was the role model for a dyke bar owner? Come on.
Right.
Great.
And there were laws against, I didn't have any experience, I couldn't get any experience because there were laws against women tending bar then. Women could be cocktail waitresses, but they could not be mixologists or bartenders.
Unless they owned the place.
Unless they owned the place.
Uh-huh.
So I drove by one day when I went, to check it out, just to see if I might see a sign or any kind of hints that the club would be available or for sale. And I didn't. And I went to see another bar, and I came back that same evening, bought LA Times, looked in the business opportunities section, and there was the club right there.
Huh.
So I went back out that same night to confirm and verify the address, and it was the same club that was right across the street from where I used to work.
Now, did you intend when you bought the club that it would be a place that gay and lesbian people could go and hang out? Or did you?
No, not, it was, I still wasn't out to my family in particular, that I was just so afraid of losing them or them ostracizing me and wanting to please them, that was my concern then. But little did I know, it didn't matter about what my plans were. As soon as the children, as I call them, found out that I had opened a club, then within a very short time it became a gay club by night. The older Caucasian people, retired people that had been drinking at the bar for 50 years remained, and I understand that you have a little bit of this quality of being able to mix up different folk, that you do this in Sacramento really well, that don't seem to some people to fit, can kind of mix, and we ended up with these 3 different groups of people, with the older whites during the daytime, and then the blue-collar blacks that were generally homophobic too, and then the gays later on at night. And then I'd have a fear about what if these folks crossed, and eventually they did.
Sure. And
everybody had a good time. So I think we were all introduced to the fact that we can all get along if we take the time to know each other.
There's been some criticism over the years that because the bars were the first and early on the only place we got together, that we probably have a higher population in AA now than any other group in the world, because it was really sort of the only place to do it. But what was your own feeling about your place? Because I know you must have been proud of it.
Oh, I was extremely proud. One of the things that I wanted was to have a place that was right there in the neighborhood that would be comparable to any, and not having the kind of financial backing that I needed to make this happen all at once. It took years of virtually doing most of the work myself, painting and the plumbing and DJing and whatever. It was so funny, speaking of DJing, whenever I would make a mix, because it was not a DJ that blended, then the kids would just clap, you know, yay. She made a mix,
right.
you know. But they were happy to be there, and I was happy to you know, be able to have that happen for us too.
And I would imagine that after a while, people thought of you as more than just the owner of the disco. I mean, I know you to be a person that a lot of people feel they can talk to, and you sort of became like a one-woman social services agency, really, along the way. Tell us a little about the people who came there and how you saw things change, if you did.
Sure. There were a lot of changes. As far as, and like you mentioned before, we have a higher incidence of alcoholism and drug abuse in the gay and lesbian community than in the broader community. But we met there. I don't really think that contributes solely to what to our big numbers, but it was a place to meet and to hang out and be with your own kind in a space where that was all that it was, and you didn't have to worry about looking over your shoulders, because everybody there was, whether they were out or not, generally, you know, they were lesbian and gays. I myself had a problem with alcohol and drugs, and am sober now and have been for the last 11 years. A lot of people probably wonder, how do you reconcile having a bar and being sober? And we also have of course, Cocaine Anonymous meetings there, and AA meetings, and rap sessions, and in the past we've had adult children of alcoholics meetings, fundraisers, a place where people could bring their parents when they hadn't talked to them, and by now I'm as old as some of the kids' parents, so you know, they can bring their folks in and say, you know, this is not a dive where we're doing all kinds of things wherever your imagination is taking you. This is not the place where I hang out. And
so you're like the credibility for it's okay to go there.
Exactly.
And do you talk to the parents? I mean, have some
sure
conversation with them about, because they'll be worried about their kids,
right.
I imagine.
Oh yes, I have met a lot of them, have sat down and talked to a lot, and it still goes on. Very recently, one of my brother's employees of 20-something years, she called me to tell me that her daughter was coming to my club.
Huh.
You know, so, and then I have, of course, exes that their kids are now old enough to come to the club, and quite a few of them do.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I think that we were able to talk to parents and able to demonstrate that, you know, except for what we do in our beds, it's pretty much not so interesting, not nearly where most people take it, you know. It's not all of that. It's real simple life that most of us live and lead.
What kind of changes have you seen in the broader world about our community in terms of, you know, I mean, everybody is talking about us now. Mm-hmm. The words gay and lesbian can be printed in the paper.
Right.
And there's debate in, you know, in the churches, in the colleges, in everywhere. Just from your point of view, how do you see the way things have changed? And some of the for better and some of the for worse?
Sure. Like most change, it's, I believe, a cyclic situation where in a few years ago, we were, I think, at the top of this cycle of acceptance, but at more of a superficial level. I think now the people that accept us really accept us and love us and will come out and stand for us. I'm speaking, you know, generally now, and what I found in my relationships with people like the parents of some of my customers and my own parents. And but on the other hand, as is true of the civil rights movement, and now it's true of the gay rights movement, we're in some areas going back to square one, and we have, the far right, and we have, in our community, not a real broad acceptance of African American gays and lesbians.
Well, there's been, as a matter of fact, there's been a real attempt, I think, to drive a wedge between the civil rights community and activists, which generally means African American civil rights activists, or at least civil rights movement, and the gay and lesbian movement. I know up in Sacramento, when I have a bill, or anybody has a bill that might help gay and lesbian people, there are always African American ministers who come up to testify, or of course Dr. King's niece has been going all around the country to talk about the difference. What's the response been in the community, do you think?
Well, I'm not going to pretend to have my pulse on everything. I can just basically tell you how I feel. And in response to Dr. King's niece, I, along with Phil Wilson and some other people, were invited by Coretta Scott King, who was Dr. King's widower, to come to Atlanta to her Center for Social Change in an effort to find out more about us. So the fact that the niece is doing something is by no means indicative of what I feel that the King family in general, civil rights are civil rights as far as they're concerned.
Well, and Coretta Scott King was one of the first people to sign the marriage declaration.
Exactly.
About, that we ought to be able to marry, which is still a very radical step for a person to take, and I think gives a lot of credibility. I think the African American civil rights movement is the civil rights movement.
Right. I mean,
and they're the only folks that can give credibility to anybody else's movement, I think.
Yeah, we launched it. And when I say we, I'm talking about African Americans launched civil disobedience and civil rights movements in this country. And it's, as in any great movement or any great person, those that come along are going to resemble it some kind of way, just as in the civil rights movement, we got our model from Gandhi.
Right.
And where Gandhi probably got his model from someone else in history. So I don't think there's anything wrong and everything right with imitating something that worked and collaborating with something that has worked. And I think it's more important today than ever to realize that if we're discriminated against as gays, then the next folks on the totem pole, this same Bible, these same ministers that are quoting always the Old Testament, because and even though they consider themselves Christians, and I might be getting a little bit off, so you can check me if you want to.
I wouldn't even think of it.
But the Christian, by virtue of its word, means Christ-like, and so we have to go to the New Testament and deal with what Christ purported as far as Christianity is concerned. And he only had two things that we had to do, and that was to love our neighbors as ourselves and to love God with all our heart and mind and soul. Those were the only two commandments. So when you start talking this Old Testament stuff about lying with this one, and that, if you're not eating pork, and if you're not eating shrimp, and if your wife sits beside you in church and you don't put her out when she's on her monthly, then you're not doing the Old Testament, and you can't take out the things that you want.
Right.
Because you feel it necessary in order to have power to pick someone that you think has less power than you and try to step on them.
Well, and don't these quotes sound familiar too? I mean, I was in Birmingham in 1963. These are the same guys that were standing in the doors of their churches then.
Exactly.
You know, to exclude another population that they're now trying to embrace to do homophobia.
Right.
Which is...
Yeah, and this is my biggest peeve is about that, how short the memory is of some of these ministers that don't see that the same kind of prejudice was what got us here. We came over on the good ship Jesus or something like that. You know, when the slaves were first brought here was in the name of Jesus. That we're still not on the top of the list for people to come home with these same right-wing people. African Americans are not on the top of the list, and it could change really, really fast. And I think that a lot of these ministers, and I might get in a little trouble saying this, but I've been known to be in trouble before, are selling out, you know, to these right-wing groups and allowing themselves to be puppets in the name of the Bible and what is and what is not for us. Where the truth of the matter is that we're everywhere, gays and lesbians are, including the pulpits of some of the most famous churches, black, white, or Hispanic, or wherever. You know, 10% is 10%, and I think we're across the board with that.
Well, and of course, I mean, the best kept non-secret, I think, in so many churches is that, you know, that in just about every African American church I ever saw, and Dr. Sylvia Rue said this last night too, you know, your choir master and the person who plays the organ, they're gay, you know, gay men.
Right.
And everybody knows, but it can't be acknowledged that this
and
is
there's
also fundamental in
plenty
the
of
church.
preachers are too.
Yeah.
You know, I've talked to, and I'm not just, you know, taking this from the heart this time. I've talked to so many young men, you know, over the years, and we find it with priests, and you know, it's coming out a little bit more. But the priests weren't the only ones that have been guilty of that. You know, and I've talked to a lot of young men over the 25 years that I've been in this business, and plenty of them, their first homosexual experience was with their minister or someone else at the church that they attended.
Well, Jewel, it's funny to me, you know, here you are, you're like the owner of a bar, and that's really how you characterize yourself. But then we hear, well, but you and Phil Wilson were invited by Coretta Scott King to come back and talk about this community. I mean, you have become really a leader. I know that at UCLA, Gay and Lesbian Student Organization named an award after you. And your work in the community, I mean, you know, it's well known and very much admired. There are a lot of business owners who are members of our community who don't see themselves as participating in the community, though. It's sort of like, you know, I'm a businessman, this is what I do, or I'm a businesswoman, this is what I do. What brought you to go sort of just beyond the bottom line of your business and really, because you're deeply involved in the community and have done such leadership?
Well, I feel genuinely grateful for being given the opportunity to earn a living for 25 years doing something that I love and having a party, one big 25-year long party. And so this is the way that I give back. But we're individuals, like I said before, so, you know, what works for me or what motivates me might not motivate, you know, the next person. But I have no choice in the matter. You know, I was moved and put in the position to be there for my community even long before I knew that I was ready to step out and be that for us.
You mean you were asked or you were moved by your heart?
Yeah, I was moved by my heart. And basically there was no one else around either. You know, our history is very, very short. as you know, it's 1960s. I think maybe some of the radical fairies might go back to the late 50s, but that's a relatively short history. And so when I got started in the business in the early 70s, there were no role models for me that I knew of, and I thought it was really important that I be that for as many people as I could.
Now you're in a relationship now?
Yes.
You have a long-term relationship? Will you talk a little about your partner?
Oh, most definitely.
Please.
Yeah. She, Rue and I met at the first African-American gay and lesbian church that was founded by Bishop Carl Bean. And she told me later that she had come to the club maybe 3 or 4 years before then. Didn't know who I was, but when she was sitting at the bar, she said she just saw it, that she didn't know who this woman was, but she knew that one day she would be with me. So 4 or 5 years later, we met. I was determined at that time that I wouldn't get in another relationship, hopefully ever, but at least for a long, long time. And I was like 3 years into this commitment to myself, not to get involved in a relationship. I dated, but nothing serious. And so we met at Unity Church. I've been one of the people that helped found and helped get it started, along with the Minority AIDS Project. And Rue, who had lived in the outskirts of town, she liked mountains and canyons and that sort of thing, so she was unknown to me. And one day we were asked to work on getting this bus ride together where there was going to be an AIDS demonstration out at the Episcopalian Church by the Sea, I think Reverend Malcolm's church. And so we were having afternoon ladies' tea dances, because you asked me about how the scene had changed. Well, the club scene changed, and the gay and lesbian scene overall changed from it being predominantly a male, predominantly a male thing, as was my club. Most of my customers were guys, and there'd be a handful of women and 500 or 600 guys on any given night there. Well, it started to change in the early 80s, and women who usually just had house parties or went to 1 or 2 clubs were starting to come out and be seen publicly. So this was an opportunity to feed into that. So we had women's tea dances after church services on Sundays. And Rue came over and helped me cook, which I did a lot of in those days too. And after the dance, we were to go on to this candlelight vigil out at the church by the sea. And so we missed each other, and she had to go because she was organizing the people that were riding on the bus. So I got in my car and I broke down the 10 freeway and went out to the church, and I was there. By the time the bus pulled up, I was there. And I told her, I apologized for missing the bus, and so she said it was okay, and we sat down, and she said that she was a little bit cold, so I took my jacket off. Chivalry is not dead here. And put it over her legs, and then afterwards I asked her if she wanted to ride home with me, and so she had to go back and tell the folks that she was not going to take the ride back on the bus. And then, you know how it is with girls, 2 weeks later, she moved in.
Yeah.
Well, she came to spend the night and have dinner, and never went home. So it's
how long ago was that?
8 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
And tell us a little more about her, what she engaged in and what her life is about.
Yeah, well, Rue, after we got together, opened Rue's House, which was the first shelter for women and children with AIDS in the country. And she did that for 7 or 8 years and closed after the holidays this past year with the protease inhibitors and a lot of other people opening the need, which was what we had committed to, what she had committed to when we first got into it, was she'd be there till there was no more need, and that time came, and so now she's retired, and we got a place in the mountains, and that's where I go when I'm not here working and doing my thing in LA, and going to school now too.
You're going to school?
Yeah.
What are you
It's
doing?
never too late.
Don't I know it? So what are you going to school for?
I'm going to school for traditional Chinese medicine. I'm in my 3rd plus year, and when I finish next September, I'll have a Bachelor's of Science degree in Oriental Medicine, and once I pass the state boards, then I'll be a licensed acupuncturist, and I'm thinking now of going 2 more years after that to either get my PhD or my OMD.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives me another opportunity to serve our community in a different way. Drug and alcohol abuse, of course, is going to be at the top of my list of things that I'll be dealing with, as well as natural treatments for people with AIDS, and then one more, of course, women's issues and the health problems that we experience.
You know, Jewel, there's been, it's interesting to me, the community adopted as its flag, the rainbow flag.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we have, like any community or any country or any culture, we have our aspirations. And one of the aspirations is to be a true rainbow community, and I think there's a lot of commitment to it. But my own impression is that we're still pretty far away from it.
Sure.
How do you see us, well, how would you give us a report card, really, in terms of specifically around our sort of race relations stuff?
Mm-hmm. I think there's been some progress made, but we kind of imitate the broader community in that there's still a lot of separatism going on. It feels a lot now like it was in the 70s when a group of us formed Black Gay Coalition, another group that was led by Susan McGreevy,
Mm-hmm.
got the ACLU to the ACLU's Gay and Lesbian chapter to add in, and I was fortunate enough to chair the minority gay and lesbian issues committee. And if things were right, then that wouldn't have been necessary to be. And over the years, I've been fortunate enough to be able to, I think, access certain boards, certain organizations, and try to do what I could to improve race relations.
Well, I don't know if you were fortunate enough or whether people just begged you to come do the work.
Well, I feel fortunate in that this was something in my heart to do. I didn't do a lot around the civil rights movement because that took money too. You had to be able to buy your bus ticket down too, but my heart was always there. And so this dealing with race relations among gay and lesbians gave me an opportunity to get some of that resolved that I couldn't do then.
But I guess we're certainly still struggling with it, and the good news is that you struggle with it.
Right.
The bad news is that you still have to, and that some people don't even choose to do that. I know in the old days, even in terms of the bar scene. There were a lot of places where I know people of color just so happened they had to have 3 or 4 different IDs, and
Sure.
if they hadn't brought that, or the place was full, they'd had to go get back in line. Have you seen that change? I mean, that was sort of like the overt stuff goes underground, or?
Right. There's only so much overtly that will be tolerated now, based upon the work that Martin Luther King and then in our case Ron Grayson's and the Phil Wilsons and the Carl Beans and the you know, the rest of us, the Sylvia Rues, and you know, there's a lot of us that have been out there, Stephanie, and you know, but you know, we won't tolerate that, and we started not tolerating it back in the early 70s, and you know, we went out and we marched, even though I would have preferred to have all the African Americans and anybody else for that matter, as long as their spirit was right, come to the club.
Well, the club's been pretty integrated, don't you think, over
Yeah.
the last 20 so years?
Oh yes.
I mean, I know that it was a very comfortable place for folks in the community, African American community, to come, and that was rare in the beginning.
Sure.
And maybe still rare. I'm not sure in terms of comfort, but I know it was. A lot of people felt real comfortable going there.
Right.
It's a great place.
Yeah, we never discriminated. I don't believe in reverse discrimination, and there's some of us that do, and you know, we're, like I said one more time, we're real different, and I don't pretend to speak for everyone, you know, just for myself. Times have changed, and times have not changed.
So that's the past, and that's the present. Let me ask you just a couple of final questions, really, because I think we're down to 4 or 5 minutes left.
Okay.
What do you see for the future? I know for yourself, because I see now you're going to be an acupuncturist and a doctor of Chinese medicine, and I'm glad to know that. That's going to be good for me. But what do you see in terms of the larger future, kind of for the community and what I guess we're loosely calling the gay and lesbian movement?
But this is a difficult time for us, Sheila, for a lot of reasons. We're being attacked viciously by the right. We're trying to recover, and in our case, with the African Americans, we're not doing a really good job of doing that, from the devastation of the virus, and too many people died. Too many folks that would be activists now, too many folks that would be integrationists now, too many folks that would leading us out to personally be in the forefront and attack these right-wing folk on their turf even, have gone on. You know, they're not here. And so there's a big gap in the leadership. There's a big gap of people that are not there between the few older folk that survived and the younger ones that came up. There's this big hole of folk that have died. You know, anytime you take the numbers that we lost and are still losing in that war and remove them, then it's hard to recover from that. So I really don't know, except that those of us like you and I and others have to, where we should be at a time where we could kind of look back and do some mentoring. We've got to put our holsters and stuff back on and go out there and still try to keep up the fight.
Well, and it's hard because young people don't have, you know, it's like they're called upon to make up leadership on their own, because there's so many ways in which they don't know who to turn to, or you know, or what to gain experience from. Not that young people ever are real good at taking advice, even if there was a whole bunch of people there to tell it to them. Well, I very much appreciate your being here. This was really fun for me.
Thank you.
Yes.
I enjoyed it, and thank you for having me here.
Well, and Jewel Tice-Williams from Catch One, I want to invite all of you, many of you live in LA, but a whole lot of you who watch this show don't. So whenever you're in LA, you got to go to the Catch. It's a great place, and you would get used to it.